Hello, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. And you'll learn something new today, too, I am sure. I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Leslie Price, coming to us from just outside London. She's with www.learnappeal.org.uk. Lots of dots. .uk.org.uk. Remember that, Learn Appeal. And I think Harold was showing it. Anyway, so here we go. We've got in-house, we've got Harold Muliati. He's producing the show and running the video switcher. Our guest today, Dr. Susan Friedman. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks. And we are back, and in that center position of power, as we like to call it, we've got Susan Friedman. Hey, Susan, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. And just for the record, Susan and I are good friends. Her husband, my wife, they've all known each other since very young ages. And we've known Susan for probably way over a decade now. And always a pleasure. And Susan is in this field. I know we've talked several times with you. Want to come on the show? Yeah, maybe. That's it. But we did. Finally, she agreed. So we're glad to have her on. Susan's got a great career. She started out in the legal industry. Then she got her master's in educational psychology as well as instructional technology. And her doctorate is in education, but there was another part of it. What was the other part on the
psychology and leadership, yes.
And leadership. That's great. Boy, do we need leadership. But anyway, it's good to have you on the show. And you had a lot of topics in mind today. Let's see how many we can get through. I think we've got a multi-parter going on here. But we were talking a little bit pre-show about contextual, things being in context and some of the contextual issues that people in the learning industry face. Did you want to start on one of those?
Sure. So my thought is, as I gained experience in instructional design and learning experience design, it occurred to me that there are a lot of issues. I mean, there's always issues with design in and of itself, right? Within the context of just doing that work, that technical side and so forth. But there's also contextual issues. And there are things that go on with other people and within the organization in which you work that are just outside of the actual job description necessary, pretty much. And that's what I thought would be interesting to explore. These are my personal observations and based on my personal experiences, so it has not been validated in any way. But what I've thought about is putting it in the context of the organization and the people, and then what is the challenge? How do you actually address that challenge? And if you want to go and learn more, how does it connect to some of our associations? I looked at the SHRM competency model and the recent ATD development model and connected it intuitively with those models, so you can kind of see how they align with the industry standards that have been put forth by these associations.
That sounds really good. And just so you know, Susan's background, she's been with some very large multinationals working in different areas, but in the training industry in those. And some of them are very large companies you've probably heard of. So tell us, what are some of the challenges that people are facing contextually in this industry or in organizations?
Well, there's a number of them, and I provided a document initially. One of them, let's talk about maybe expectations first. And that's one of the things that is within, let me see, which was it? Sorry about that. It's actually within the people side of the categories that I put together, and it's expectations relating to what the learner outcomes will be, and then it's expectations relating to what the designer outcomes will be. So let's talk about the learners first. Yeah, those were the two that I thought about. So the designers, the expectations for learners, we always try to create the best outcome possible. But in a large extent, and in a lot of ways, there's not a lot of time to actually test everything before you release it. So when you go ahead and try to design something under a short time frame, the expectation for learners might be different. You have to be very clear. You should be very clear as to, given the time you have to actually get feedback that you can look at and say, oh, we did a pilot and we should make these adjustments, right? Or we've only done alpha and beta and only the SMEs have looked at it. They've made their adjustments, but we don't really have time to do a pilot where we would actually have learners test it and go through the program and give us their feedback as learners. How well does it help them on the job? So that's managing those expectations for the learner outcomes, I think, are important. So one of the ways that I talked about was being familiar, ways to address this challenge, was being familiar with the action research, quantitative, qualitative research methodologies, because you can maybe do those in different ways. And those might be ways to get some data back. Like maybe you could do a follow-up session for a targeted set of learners where you go and talk to the manager afterwards. Maybe there's a survey, although I understand the burnout rate for those sometimes. And maybe there's follow-up surveys that you can do, but targeted to learning objectives, right? Targeted to the way work is done, not just the general surveys that we often see. So that's one of them.
What you were, can I just interrupt there, Susan? Because with what you're talking about, I think it's also, if you're going to get the context right, you also have to make sure that you use the right language and terminology. Because very often the language that people who are delivering, who are on the L&D side, is different from the language of the learner, the employee, which is also then maybe different from the language of the manager, which may be different from the language of the senior management, and very different from the research people. So to me, use of language also fits in with context. Is that something that you've come across as well?
Yes, and I come across that in a lot of SME conversations. When you have subject matter experts that are in the field, or even potential learners, maybe you're doing a pilot and maybe a focus group after, something along those lines. Yes, you have to make sure you're talking to them in their own language, not your language. So you don't use anything like, I wouldn't even say SME. I would say something like, this is a group of people where you're very knowledgeable about your field and you know how things work better than anybody because you do the work. That makes you very qualified to give feedback to us, to inform us about how this is working out. And that's the way I talk to learners, themselves, or SMEs themselves. So yes, you're right. I agree with you. Language is very important.
And it's interesting with language and communications. And you've worked in different industries. You've experienced this firsthand. The aviation industry, which has its own set of language. You've worked in the car industry. Manufacturers, they have their set of languages. There are commonalities, but it's almost like no matter where someone goes, you've got to learn that particular set and whatever acronyms they use. And We've been in
Oh,
some
yeah.
places that there are so many acronyms. You're like, what the heck does that mean? And it's never quite the same.
Yeah.
And it may be the same initials, but they mean something totally different to someone else. And
Yeah.
how, for example, in your experience, what's the best way to learn what the language is, so that you can communicate better with people?
Well, what's interesting, when I was a new employee at the most recent company, actually both the last couple of companies I worked for, I had to ask a lot of questions as a new person. And acronyms in a conversation, and when you get in on meetings, when you're listening to the people speak, they're so familiar with their acronyms and with their language that they shortcut quite a bit. And the whole conversation might just be a string of acronyms, which is very interesting. So they were very good. The last couple companies I worked with, they were very, very good about telling me, stop us and ask us what it is you need to understand or what we can clarify for you. So I think that's setting that up and getting that, I don't want to say permission, but getting that openness with your organization, your peers, is really important. The second thing is a lot of them recognize that they have so many acronyms, and they have printed documents that you can actually study.
Oh, that's good.
So that's something that you can just say, hey, is there something in writing I can reference to get more familiar? Maybe before you even onboard, you can ask them for resources that will help you in that regard. That way, when you come in and you start talking with people, you don't have that continuous, wait, what's this? Conversation. Yeah. And one other thing about language is that one mistake I made is when I first got my degrees, I was working with a team of people I was a paralegal at the time, and I was working with other paralegals who, we all knew the paralegal language, but I was learning a new language. And I was trying to teach them that new language because we were on a committee together. We were all working together. And I made some assumptions about how open they might be to learning that new language with me. So that's something that for those transitioning in that transitioning space, if you move along to a certain new place, don't assume everybody's going to come with you. So that's something that when you use language, it's good if they're open to it, but be careful how much you have them, come along with you.
It's part of that whole. Go ahead, Leslie.
No, I was just going to say that, acronyms, acronyms can be an absolute nightmare, a complete and utter nightmare. And even for people within the same organization, you can go into two different parts of the organization and it's different acronyms.
Yes, I've experienced that too. And one thing to keep in mind as a designer, that your acronyms you have to watch how you treat those in actual instruction. You have to watch how you treat information. This is another one of my organizational points. When you get information that you have to put into a program, you oftentimes will ask SMEs for what problems have you experienced when you do this work, for instance, or what are the pitfalls, what are the decisions people have to make, and what are the challenges with some of those decisions, for instance. When you get those, you may get acronyms out, and you may get information out from them, but how do you treat that information? Is there anything proprietary with what they're telling you? Is there anything that's not understandable and perhaps could be misconstrued by those receiving it, by the students, the learners that are receiving it? So when you look at, for instance, global organizations, how are people interpreting something like an acronym or something else when they're in India versus when they're in the United States versus when they're in Asia? So those are things to address when you have a target audience. Sometimes you have to really look at how things are marked. Sometimes you have to pay attention to the intellectual property aspects of the kinds of things you're saying. So that could come across with acronyms, that could come across with examples, situations, like if you're writing out a situational scenario. Be careful how you're saying those and think about how they're being received.
Because you potentially also can offend people because of cultural differences. So we might have an acronym which we say out loud and we think is normal, but that could actually be offensive language in another culture. I've come across that between the difference between being in the UK and, you know, places in Africa and places in Asia, where what you're saying, the acronym, is actually, you know, you get the raised eyebrows, you know, my goodness, what she just said.
Now, what's an example? What's an example of one of those, Leslie? Like, especially.
Oh, I can't think off the top of my head.
I'm just curious. So we. Yeah.
No, but they do exist.
Yeah. And of course, and the same thing goes.
I just can't think of one off the top of my head.
And even gestures, you have to be careful with. A common one that we use in the States is okay.
Well, I've heard about that.
In many parts of Europe, that is a-hole.
Big fat zero.
And yes, big fat zero. That's enough, but it can get you in trouble. I've had conversations with, especially Germans, and I said, that's perfect. And she looked at me and goes, why do you call me an a-hole? Sorry, I forgot. It was one of those, I just totally forgot that that's not used in certain places. Things that we may consider offensive, other people don't even notice, and vice versa. So you do run into that quagmire of cultural differences that can really get you into a bad situation, or doing things that are incorrect. For example, bowing you go to Asia and you bow. Not everybody bows, and in some cases, if you're bowing, that's considered demeaning yourself. In other cases, you should bow, and and it also depends. If you're in Japan, it's one culture. If you go to China, it's a different culture, and they're not all the same. And a lot of times, foreigners assume it's all the same. It isn't. And even within a company, that creates all sorts of issues. Now, Susan, when you worked in these multinationals, for example, where they had vendors from all over the place, they probably had teams that were building parts in different countries. Did you run into that ever, where something you were teaching or said wasn't understood by them?
Oh, I think that came across in an organization where I was, it was a Japanese organization. And I remember designing a program where I was using language, sticking on the language, and I can't remember exactly what the word was, but it had it was an English word that everybody recognized, but it had a different meaning in Japan than it did in the United States. And we had full discussions about how somebody in the U.S. would interpret that word and somebody in Japan would interpret the word. So I've always worked for human resources organizations within the corporate field. I was previously a paralegal, litigation paralegal for a number of years, and that's where I segued into training, learning and professional development, and then I jumped over to the corporations that I've recently worked for. So the corporations, all of them were multinational, but there was more sensitivity with organizations that were originating from another country versus the United States. And then within HR, a lot of times you work on enterprise-wide initiatives, enterprise-wide programs. So when you're doing enterprise-wide, you have to really think about the different audiences and how they're going to interpret the various things you have. And you also have to really look at intellectual property, because you have to protect proprietary information. You have to protect personally identifiable information. and you have to comply with the cultural implications, and make sure that you're sensitive to the different cultures, and to your point, the kinds of things that will be interpreted differently between organizations.
It's interesting when you bring up the part about intellectual property. That's an issue that companies are having all over the place ever since social media became popular, because, I won't point a finger, but it has to do a lot with youth who doesn't have the same discretion as others, and everything's fair game, put it out there. And then they get in trouble. And they go, why did I get in trouble? I don't know what I did. Well, you gave out private information or things that are trademarked or whatever else. And it's a tough one because I don't think companies spend enough time teaching new employees about intellectual property, about what you can and can't say.
Yeah. And speaking of, okay. Sorry. I thought, Leslie, you were getting on the phone. I thought you were making a comment. But when you prepare presentations, a lot of times there are organizations where you can just snapshot something from the internet or capture an image and use it in the presentation. That's a really big no-no, right? Yep. So you shouldn't do that, and you should be really careful about what information you capture, making sure that you have permission to use that. So there are a couple of good resources like Unsplash, for instance, Creative Commons, that are totally free, and you should always cite where you got your information from whenever you use it in any kind of presentation. I've had big logs of where, if I had to storyboard something, I have an associated log of every single thing that I captured with an image. I don't care if it's, something pointing a finger at a bullet point, whatever it is, even if something's as simple as that. And you have to look at what kind of pictures you might incorporate from the organization itself. Is it okay to take a picture within your company, right? If you're taking a picture of something you're trying to display, like a sign, let's say you're doing a safety program and you're trying to show the exit sign. Well, what is it that is showing outside and around that exit sign? Is that okay to show? And it's just one of those things, somebody can have something on their desks. There could be notifications on the wall. There could be all kinds of interesting things around that, we take it for granted, but it's important to be sensitive to. There are organizations where you cannot take a picture anywhere on the property. You cannot have a camera. If you're caught taking a picture of something, you'll get, they'll address that with you. So be sensitive. There's a wide range of things that can easily be taken for granted. And it's important to know your organization and how they like to treat information.
Well,
also pictures, photographs, and things of people. You have to be so careful with photographs of people, because people might actually have issues in their private life, for example, that they don't want for whatever reason, they don't want their picture taken. They don't want people to know what they're doing. They don't want people to know where they are. I know certainly when I was doing stuff, doing online stuff, we had to get signed permission for every single photograph or anything we used of individuals. We couldn't just show it or do it. We had to have written authorization from individuals.
Or model releases. If you take anybody in a video or in a picture, you put a model release and they have to sign it. And another thing that happens in a lot of companies, there's people always want to have the president's introduction or this or a senior VP. And the minute you put out the training, they're gone. Oops.
Oh.
And that happens all the time. And it's such a pain because then you've got to redo stuff. You've got to get the new if they still want to do that, you can make a recommendation. Don't use a picture, maybe just use and even that, whether it's the name or the statement, you have to be careful with that too. And that happens all the time. people leave right when you put them in.
That's very true. I did work on a project where we had a leader who switched. We went from one leader to another. And there was also another example where we had an initiative name change. And oh my gosh, it was embedded everywhere. Because the first thing you want to do as a designer is you incorporate your initiatives, right? So you incorporate the emphasis on, say, something like safety or diversity and inclusion or, ethics or whatever it may be that's appropriate to your topic. You always weave that in. But whenever you weave that in and there's any kind of shift, it'll be outdated. And then it's discredited, right? You don't have credibility. So that's something that is important to keep on top of. And again, another log, another background, maybe in association with the source documents. You want to keep where you get information. You want to be able to track how different initiatives and different people are treated. Because if some change happens, you don't want to have to review everything to find it. You want to be able to go to your things and maybe sort and identify it maybe in a database, or maybe identify it in some key documents pertaining to the topic.
Now, you made a comment earlier about how you identify what your sources were for photos and things like that, which is actually a really good idea. We got sued recently for, I think it was a $5,000 lawsuit for using a photograph on our website. And we're going, we know where that photograph came from, but we couldn't find the source of work. We're pretty sure that was something we've had for like probably 15, 20 years, and it just happened that we used it. And it was something we couldn't find on our servers, and we didn't know where it actually came from. So fortunately, we have E&O, errors and omissions insurance, but still, they wound up paying $1,500 to, and it's a scam. This is a scam run by a lawyer, unfortunately, who's also a photographer. So he puts out all these things as public domain, then changes it, or royalty free, changes it, and then sues people, and he gets away with it. And the lawyer we had defending us goes, I know you're right. I know you didn't steal it. But he goes, in this field, it's show me the proof. And if you don't have the proof of where you got it, unfortunately, we can't do anything. And I go, you're right. I agree. So they had to pay $1,500 to the scammer guy. And it's sad, but that's what goes on. And I've seen people get in trouble putting clips from a TV show or TV show soundtrack because they thought it was funny, and they put it into the e-learning piece. And one employee who happens to be disgruntled at the company, not the designer, not the training department, at the company, or who got fired, then immediately goes and tells the company where that logo or whatever the song was, hey, these people are doing copyright infringements, and you get sued. You have to be very, very careful with that. Because a lot of people think, I'm going to create some internal training and I'm going to use the Gilligan's Island theme song or something else. You can't. You can't. No. If you do, that's copyrighted material. And unless it's in the public domain, and you have to prove that.
Yeah, that's very true. So it is important to keep track of all those things. And the other thing is, that's assuming you're taking something that's new. But a lot of times you have projects where there's a good number of materials and things from a previous version of the product, right? Maybe you're just updating something. It's important to check that you have all of those sources from the previous material. Don't make assumptions that just because it was okay before, and you're assuming it was okay before, that it's okay now. Because it may not be. And Rick, to your point, that could open yourself up to a lot of different problems with liability issues.
Yeah, I remember
we even have that issue with Learn Appeal, that even though the content that we are creating is not going to be online, this is the charity that I work for, Susan. So with Learn Appeal, even the charity I work for, people create content for us, and it's not offline, it's not online, it's offline. But I always tell them they must credit the sources.
Yeah.
They absolutely have to credit source. They
Mm-hmm.
must, even though the people who are going to be using it are never going to go online, because they're not able to. It's still
Right.
incredibly important that all sources are credited. Even if it's Creative Commons, you say it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We
I
just
agree
did a
with you.
course.
I agree.
Yeah, we just did a course on Udemy, and at the end of it, we cite where all the music came from, where the pictures came from, just to be one to give credit to the people who actually created the music and pictures, but also really to indemnify ourselves and Udemy that, hey, we're not stealing this stuff. We're not doing it without proper notification, because you're right. Again, it doesn't take anything to sue someone. It's very quick and easy, or to just get in trouble for no reason. And a lot of people, especially in the multimedia world, don't know anything about copyright law or other things, and they get caught all the time. Sometimes they get hand slapped, other times they get hit with suits. And it may not be a lot to say it's $1,500 or $1,000. It adds up. If you get a lot of those, you just spend a lot of money, and it's not a good thing.
Well, and you have to think about the companies with deep pockets, right?
Mm-hmm.
That could really be a problem. Bigger companies have big pockets, and they are absolutely a target.
Oh, the buzzards are just flying overhead looking at you, aren't they? Yeah, it's bad. It's bad, and it shouldn't be that way, but it is, and you have to be prepared for it, because, like Susan said, deep pockets. That means they're ready to sue you, and it's amazing. Actually, it goes both ways, because a lot of companies with deep pockets don't even defend themselves when they should, or cave to any ridiculous requirements when they shouldn't. They just don't want to go there. I think they're afraid of things snowballing into very large lawsuits. So, yeah, it's not fun, and it happens all the time. And I don't think we give enough attention to it in training, at least when people are being trained. Be careful with the content you use. Be careful with the music, music, art, anything you're using. You just have to be a little careful with, and do cite your sources. It's very good advice.
Very true. And also, one other point to that is, a lot of times with older material, you'll get things done in smart art, or you'll get some kind of way of organizing information that might have been done by a previous employee.
Mm-hmm.
Look at, if you can identify who did that work, right? Is it still somebody on the same team? Do they still work here? Assuming you look at it and you say, we could still use this. This looks good still. It's relevant. It's something people can relate to. If you can't pin back where that came from, it's best to just recreate it. And that way you have a current person who can say, yes, I did this, and I give permission to use it. And you're brought current, as opposed to using something from somebody where you don't really know where they got their information from and how they organize their information. So it's always best to bring all those kinds of things current. Make sure it's absolutely legit and documented before you release a program.
Yep, that sounds good. Now, we are out of time, believe it or not.
We are.
It goes fast. It goes fast, but we'd love to have you back on, and we still have a list of a lot of things that we haven't gotten to. Love to have you back on and talk some more about these things, because we don't talk enough about some of the stuff we're talking about, and it's things that affect all of us on a daily basis. And we haven't even gotten heavy into context yet on some things, but every time we talk context, I see Leslie stuck going, context? Did somebody say context? That's one of her favorite subjects.
To me, it's not, content isn't king, it's context that's king.
Yep.
Yes, it is very important. So I'm happy to talk about it further.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Do you have any last questions or any last comments, Leslie?
No, not at all. No, for me, it's actually quite interesting, because it's all things that when I was working in the field that I used to tell people, And it's things that with the people who are designing content for us for Learn Appeal, I tell them as well. It's like, use of language is important, especially when the people are creating content for those in other countries where, although English is spoken, they also speak other languages. So, KISS, keep it simple.
Yep. You forgot the stupid on that one.
I wasn't going to say
keep it simple,
that.
stupid? Yeah, I think it's keep it simple, stupid, something like that.
Yeah, keep it simple, stupid.
Yep.
But I wasn't, who am I to call you stupid, Rick?
Oh, no, there's a lot of people probably. But most people never call you that to your face. That's the funny part. Yeah,
that's a good thing.
Interesting. Anyway, well, Susan, it was fun having you on. We'll definitely schedule you on again to continue this. I think we've got lots to still cover. We still have like 6-7 points you haven't even gotten to yet, and it's all tying
we started skipping around. I had a structure in place, and we just started talking, and I have no idea where we are. So
we're good at that. We're really good. Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah, I'll send you off in many directions. That's okay. But that's okay. We'll get you back on track, and we can easily figure out what we didn't cover and it's all related. That's the whole thing. It's all related to what we're talking about. So anyway, if you are watching the show, please subscribe. Give us your feedback. If you want to get a hold of Susan, we'll have her information below. I think we have your LinkedIn or something like that we can show so people can get a hold of you if they'd like.
Sure.
Susan she's a lot of fun to talk to. We've known Susan for many years, and we have very long conversations all the time. We don't even talk about business that much half the time. We just talk about things. So it's fun. But anyway, well, have a good one, everyone. We will see you next week on eLearnChat. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.